Cathedral Gulch, Dakota Territory, 1887. The Berg boy was 4 years old, and he was wearing his dead father's Sunday cap, and Wren Mercer could not photograph him. She had photographed his mother 20 minutes earlier without any trouble at all. Nella Berg had sat in the good chair by the window with her husband's wedding likeness in her lap, and Wren had gotten her chin up and her hand still and made 2 plates, and neither woman's voice had shaken once. Wren was known for that. In 3 years, she had photographed grieving women all over the northern hills, and she had never yet spilled a bath or fogged a plate on account of feeling something. Then Nella said, "Take one of just Axel, would you? For his grandmother in the old country. She's never laid eyes on him." And the boy came and stood in the doorway in his father's cap, which came down past his ears, and looked at Wren with his whole face the way small children do. Wren's hands went cold on the plate holder. "The light's poor in here," she heard herself say. It was not. The kitchen faced south, and the March sun was coming through clean and even, and Toby Flynn, who was 13 and had been loading her plates for 2 years, went very still by the tripod and did not say a word, because he had learned not to. "It'll be poor tomorrow too," Nella said, not unkindly. She was a practical woman who had buried a husband 9 days before. "It's the only cap he'll wear." There was a man standing over by the stove with his hat in his hands. Wren had barely registered him coming in. He had brought a folded paper for Nella, a drawing of where her husband's name would sit on the memorial stone, 2nd row, 3rd from the left, and he had been waiting quietly through the whole business the way men wait in kitchens. He set his hat on the woodbox. "That cap's too big for a portrait," he said. "Won't sit right. Ma'am, let me hold it a minute and the boy can have it back after." He crossed the kitchen and got down on his heels in front of Axel Berg, which put him well below the boy's eye level, and he did not reach for the cap. He said something too low for anyone else to hear. The boy said something back. The man said something else, and the boy laughed and took the cap off himself and handed it over, and stood there in the light with his hair mashed flat and his face open. Toby pressed the bulb. It was done. Nella never knew anything had happened. She thanked them both and wrapped a loaf for Toby, and the stonecutter took his hat off the woodbox and put it on and said good afternoon. Out in the road, while Toby loaded the wagon, Wren caught up with him. "Mr. Marsh." "Ma'am?" "Thank you." She had meant to say more than that. She found she couldn't get at it. Gideon Marsh looked at her a moment. He had marble dust in the creases of his knuckles and along the edge of his jaw where he'd wiped it. "It's a hard trade you've got," he said. "Folks think it's the dead that's hard." Then he touched his hat and walked on up Bridge Street, and did not ask her one single question, which was the first thing about him she genuinely could not account for. Cathedral Gulch in 1887 was a town in a hurry to prove it would last. It had come up out of the gulch in 4 years, and it had a bank with a stone front and a church with a real bell and a rail spur with a train through it twice a week. All of it built with the particular fever of a place that suspects it may be a ghost town by spring. Portraits, headstones, names cut into things that outlast the man who paid for them. It was a good town to be in the business of memory. Wren kept a narrow studio between the assay office and the milliner's, with a skylight she'd bullied the builder into, and a dark room the size of a closet that smelled of damp paper, lamp smoke, and chemicals. She worked with gelatin dry plates shipped up from Omaha in straw-packed crates, and she was fast, and she was good, and brides came from 2 counties over because Wren Mercer could make a nervous girl look calm. She had one rule. Everybody in the gulch had noticed, and nobody had ever managed to break. Wren Mercer was never in a photograph. Not at the 4th of July group on the church steps, where she was the one under the black cloth. Not at Toby's confirmation. Not once in 3 years in any frame in the northern hills. When people said, "Get in with us, Miss Mercer," and they said it often, she smiled and said, "Somebody's got to press the bulb." and by the time they thought to point out that she had a boy who pressed the bulb just fine, she had already changed the subject. The memorial started it. The Cathedral Consolidated No. 2 lost 11 men in March when the timbers gave in the lower level. And afterward, the town did what such towns do. It took up a collection, and it appointed a committee. And the committee decided there would be a monument in the cemetery with all 11 names on it, and photographs of the 11 families, to be made into cards and sold back east where people who had never been down a shaft liked to feel something about one. The money would go to the families, and it would not be charity, which mattered to them more than the money did. They gave the stone to Gideon Marsh. They gave the photographs to Wren. There were not 11 widows. There were 9, and there was Mrs. Halloran, who had lost a son of 19 and who sat for her portrait holding his boots because she had nothing else of his. And there was a girl named Ada Pike who had been going to marry Tom Sessions in June and who asked Wren very politely whether it was allowed for her to be in it at all. "You're in it," Wren said. She sat in 11 kitchens over 9 days. She was steady in all of them. The stone went up in Gideon's yard at the top of Bridge Street, and because Wren would have to photograph it when it was finished, she had a professional reason to come look at it, and she used that reason more often than the monument strictly required. His yard was full of blank markers and half-finished angels. He worked with his sleeves shoved up, and he answered her questions about the stone and asked her nothing about herself. And she found she could stand at his rail for an hour and come away feeling rested, which had not happened to her in another person's company in 3 years. She brought the new lens up on a Thursday. It had come from Rochester with a bill she'd winced at, and it needed testing before she'd trust it on a paying sitter. And Toby had told her twice that a person could not test a portrait lens on a bucket. "Sit," Wren said. Gideon looked at the chair Toby had dragged into the middle of the yard. "I've got 11 names to cut." 10 minutes. "Toby says I can't test it on a bucket." "You can't," Toby said, from behind the tripod, with the enormous authority of a boy who has been told a thing once. So Gideon Marsh sat in a kitchen chair in his own stone yard with his hands on his knees, and it turned out that a man who could get a grieving 4-year-old to laugh in under a minute was himself the single worst sitter Wren had ever put in front of a lens. "You're holding your breath." "I am not." "Mr. Marsh, I can see you holding your breath. Your ears have gone red." "That's the sun." "It's March." Toby made a noise behind the tripod. Gideon shifted his shoulders like a horse under a new blanket. "How long is it?" 2 seconds, and I'd have had it already if you'd stop bracing like I'm going to hit you." "Folks brace," Gideon said. "You ever notice that? Man'll walk into a room easy as you please, and then somebody points a box at him and he goes stiff as a board." "I've noticed." "Why is that, you suppose?" Wren came out from under the cloth. "Because being looked at is different from being seen," she said, "and most people can only stand about one of them." He considered that. Then he sat back and his shoulders came down half an inch, and his hands went loose on his knees, and Wren said quick, "There, hold still," and pressed the bulb herself. When she developed it that night, the plate was clean and sharp, and the man in it looked exactly like himself. And she noticed, holding it up dripping to the lamp, that his right thumbnail was cracked straight across from the chisel. She noticed it. That was all. It was a small thing to notice about a person. But 3 days later, up at the rail, she watched him lay out the letter spacing, and she caught herself waiting for that thumb to come into view. And she understood, with the calm horror of a woman who has been ambushed by her own attention, that she had been keeping something. They took coffee on the studio steps at the end of April, when the 11 names were cut and only the polishing was left, and they argued for 40 minutes about letters and light. "They're V-cut," Gideon said. "You cut the groove so it takes a shadow. Letter's not the stone. The letter's the shadow in the stone." "That's the same trade I've got." "It is not." "It is exactly." Wren set her cup on the step. A face isn't the light. Anybody can put light on a face. That's just a window. A face is where you let the shadows sit and how much of it you allow. Too much and they look like a criminal. None at all and they look like nobody. Huh, he said. Don't me. I've been cutting stone 19 years and I've never once thought of it as shadow work till just now. And I don't care to have been shown it by a woman with a box. He drank his coffee. But it's shadow work. She laughed. It surprised them both. It surprised her considerably more than it surprised him, because Wren Mercer had not made that particular sound since a September night 3 years back, and had not expected the machinery for it to still be in working order. Before he left that afternoon, she went and got a plate holder out of the wagon. "Leave your hands where they are," she said. Gideon looked down at his own hands, flat on the finished stone. "They're just hands." "Hold still, Mr. Marsh." So he held still, puzzled, while she made the exposure. Nothing in the frame but 2 hands on marble, the cracked thumbnail, the dust in the knuckles, the letters coming up out of their shadow. 10 seconds. He did not ask what it was for, and she did not tell him. She did not enter it in the sales book. She put it on the shelf above the wash sink, and it was the first photograph Wren Mercer had made for herself in 3 years. Let me step out of the story a moment. I don't know where this finds you tonight. A kitchen with the last of the light going. A truck on a long road. A chair by a window with the day folding up. Wherever it is, I'm glad you pulled up by this fire. If Wren and Gideon have earned a little of your evening, a like helps this quiet corner keep its lamp lit. And tell me down in the comments the name of the town you're listening from. I read every one. Now, back to Cathedral Gulch. Because Gideon's mother is coming up Bridge Street this afternoon, and she has never once been in her son's stone yard without walking straight past the 11 names to the back fence, where there is a piece of marble standing blank against the boards, and has stood blank for a year. Gideon Marsh had come out from Ohio in the spring of 1886, an old woman on a hard train, and she had not gone home. She took a room at Mrs. Dooley's and she walked up the cemetery hill most mornings with a jar for whatever was blooming, and she tended a wooden gravestake as though it were the stone it was waiting to become. Under that stake was her younger son. Caleb Marsh and his brother had not spoken in 6 years when he died. There had been a piece of family ground back in Ohio and a debt against it, and one night of words that could not afterward be gathered up. And Gideon had gone west, and Caleb had stayed, and each of them had waited the way stubborn men wait, sure the other would write first. Neither wrote. Then Caleb came to Dakota. He took a room at the Franklin under C.M., which was how he signed everything, and he told Mrs. Neal at the desk that he had business in town and would settle up Friday. He was 2 streets from his brother's yard. By Wednesday, the pneumonia had him, and when Mrs. Neal asked was there anybody she ought to send for, Caleb Marsh said no. He was 34. Gideon found out from the undertaker, who had the name off a letter in the man's coat. Gideon built the coffin himself, out of clear pine, and dug the grave with his own hands, and drove the stake. Then he walked down to his yard and stood a marble blank on its end, and set his chisel to it, and could not make the first stroke. That was a year ago. The blank was still there. He carved everyone else. He carved beloved wife and gone home and asleep, and he carved them beautifully. And people came from 3 counties because a marsh stone was the last kind thing you could still do for somebody. At the back of his yard, against the fence, his brother's marble stood white and smooth and empty. Honoria came up on a gray afternoon in May with a letter in her hand. "My sister took sick," she said. "Ruth. She's 81 and she's on her own out there." She had the letter folded small. "And Dr. Vale says I'm not to winter here again. He says my heart won't stand another one." She said it flatly, an old woman past the age of dressing things up. So I'm going home in September, before the weather. Gideon set down his mallet. Mother, I've been up that hill 300 mornings to a stick. Her voice did not rise. It never had to. I'm asking you to cut his name before I go. That's all I'm asking. I want to see it done, and I want to carry a picture of it home to Ohio, so when it's my turn, there'll be somebody in that family plot who's laid eyes on where he is. I'll do it. You've said that 11 months. I know what I've said. Honoria looked at the 11 names, tall and clean and nearly polished. Then she looked at the fence. You'll cut strangers, she said. Every one of them spaced just so. Folks will stand in front of that monument and say what a fine hand my son has. She pulled her shawl closed. And then they'll walk on up the hill and see a stake, and they won't know there's a marsh under it. They'll think nobody claimed him. I claimed him. I dug that grave. Then finish it, Gideon. September. She put the letter in her pocket. I've buried a husband and a boy. I'd like to not go to my own without seeing his name. She walked back down the hill. She did not slam the gate. Honoria never slammed anything, which was the entire trouble with her. Wren found him in the yard before 6 the next morning, when she'd come early for the flat gray light on the monument, and he was sitting on an upturned crate in front of the blank with a chisel in his hand, and by the look of him he had been there some hours. She came in through the gate instead of turning around. She did not ask why he wouldn't cut it. She had worked out whose it was weeks ago, and standing in the wet grass at 6 in the morning, she asked him the other thing. Who was he? Gideon turned the chisel over. Then he told her. He told her about a piece of ground in Ohio and a debt and one night of words. He told her about 6 years of waiting for a letter, and about CM at the Franklin 2 streets away, telling the woman at the desk there was nobody to send for. He told her he had built the coffin out of clear pine and could not, in a year, cut 8 letters. Everybody thinks I left it blank out of respect, he said. My mother thinks it's because I'm hard. He looked at the marble. The day I cut his name, it's finished. It's the 2 of us not speaking in stone, where I've got to read it every time I go up that hill. He shrugged one shoulder. Blank. I can still tell myself he's out there being stubborn and there's time yet for one of us to write first. Wren sat down on the low wall across from him. And then she told him back, which she had not done for anyone ever since it happened. She told him about Daniel, who laughed at nothing, and about June, who was 4 and afraid of exactly nothing on this earth. About the plank house on Ferry Street 2 towns east, and the lamp that went over, and the doorway she got to and no farther before 2 neighbor men hauled her back by the arms while she fought them. She had been in the yard bringing in the wash. She had lived. Her old town had told her for a year that she ought to be grateful for it. Gideon did not say anything. He had the sense to not say anything. There's a crate in my shed, Wren said. June's whole life is in it. Every ordinary day, 3 years of them, because I was the one who understood that ordinary days are the ones you'd give anything to have back. She had her hands flat on her knees. 8 months after, I went through it. All of it, 1 plate at a time, and somewhere around midnight I understood I was hunting for a particular picture and it wasn't in there. The light was coming up gray on 11 strangers' names. There's not one photograph of the 3 of us, she said. Not one. I was always the one behind it. 3 years of keeping every single day, and I never once handed the box to somebody and stepped in. Her voice was very even, which was how it got when a thing was costing her the most. So they're gone, and there's no proof anywhere on this earth that we were ever 3 people together in a room. She looked at her hands. And that part wasn't the fire. I chose the other side of that camera every day of my married life. I just never once knew what it was I was choosing." Gideon Marsh looked at the marble against his fence for a long moment. "Well," he said, "we're a pair." She surprised herself by laughing, badly, only once, with her eyes streaming. Neither of them said anything after that. The sun came up over the monument, and they let it. He came down to the studio in July to collect the memorial cards for the committee. Toby was out at the depot, and Wren was in the darkroom with the door propped open for the air. "They're on the counter," she called. They were not on the counter. They were up on the shelf above the wash sink, where she had set them a week ago and forgotten them, and Gideon found them there. Beside them, standing face out against the wall, was a small print of 2 hands on a stone. He was still holding it when she came out. She stopped in the darkroom door with the towel in her hands. "That for the cards?" he said. "No." "For the sales book?" "No." Gideon Marsh looked at the photograph of his own hands a while longer. Then he put it back exactly where it had been standing and squared it up with 2 fingers and left it there. "Good," he said. He gathered the memorial cards. She came over to steady them, and their hands closed over the same edge of the stack and stayed there a second longer than the stack required. And then he had his hat on and was out in the July sun with the bell over the door still going. Wren stood in her own studio for some while afterward with the towel in her hands. By the last week of August, she had her trunk down from Mrs. Dooley's attic, and the stone at the back of the yard was still blank. And on the first Sunday of the month, she sent word up Bridge Street that she wanted her son at the cemetery in the afternoon to settle the matter of it. Gideon asked Wren to come, which surprised them both. The 3 of them stood on the hill in the long grass with the wind coming across, at a wooden stake, with the 11-name monument gleaming a little ways off. Honoria looked at Wren for a while, not unkindly, in the manner of a woman who has already decided a thing and is only confirming it. "You're the picture woman." "Yes, ma'am." "You've been up here with him." "Yes, ma'am." The old woman nodded slowly. Then she turned to her son. "Train's the 19th, she said. "That's 15 days. I'm not going to stand here and argue with you, Gideon. I've done all my arguing. I just want to know if I'm getting on it having seen my boy's name or not." And Gideon Marsh, who had let his mother's quiet sit in the room his whole life, finally said the true thing out loud. He got down on his heels by the stake, the way he'd gotten down in front of the Berg boy, and put his hand flat on the grass. "I've been telling myself the blank was for him," he said. "It isn't. It never was." He didn't look up. "I've been standing in front of that stone for a year because a blank stone means it isn't over, and a cut one means it is. Means I never wrote first. Means he laid up at the Franklin 2 streets from my door and told a woman at a desk there was nobody to send for. And that's the end of the account, and there's nothing left to add to it ever." The wind went through the long grass. "But he's not in the marble, Mother. He never was. Keeping it blank hasn't kept one thing about him." He stood up. "All it's done is keep me up on this hill with him instead of down there in my life, which is the one thing Caleb would have laughed himself sick over." Honoria Marsh's face did something slow and terrible. "I'll cut it this week," Gideon said. "I'll cut it right, and I'll have it set before the 19th, and you'll take your picture home to Ohio." He put his hat back on. "And then I'm going to go on down the hill and live, because a man who lets his grief keep him from the living isn't honoring his dead. He's just joining them slow." His mother stood there a long while with her hand on the wooden stake. Then she nodded, once, the way you nod when a thing you have carried a long way has finally been set somewhere it can rest. He cut it that week, in the evenings, alone. Caleb Marsh, and the 2 dates, and beneath them, in the small plain letters he settled on after 3 drafts, "Beloved son and brother." 6 years of not writing first, written at last, and it took him 4 evenings. They set it on a Tuesday, and on Wednesday morning Wren came up the hill with the camera and Toby and made the photograph for Ohio. Honoria Marsh in her good black, and her surviving son beside her with his hat in his hands, and between them the new stone with the marble dust still soft in the cut letters. Wren made 2 plates to be safe. Then she came out from under the cloth and began breaking down the tripod, and Honoria Marsh watched her do it. "Girl," the old woman said. Wren looked up. "Who takes yours?" Wren stood there in the long grass with the tripod half folded in her arms. She thought about a crate in a shed. She thought about 3 years of Saturdays and 11 kitchens and the 4th of July on the church steps. She thought about a photograph on a shelf above her wash sink that a man had picked up in July and set back down without asking her one single question. "Toby," she said. Her voice was not entirely her own. "How many plates have we got left?" "2, ma'am." "Load 1." She carried the tripod down off the hill, past the 11 names, to the flat ground at the bottom where the grass was long and the whole town lay below in the morning. And she set it up herself, and framed it herself, and checked the light with her own hand held up against it. And when it was right, she uncoiled the rubber tube and put the shutter bulb into Toby Flynn's palm and folded his fingers over it. "When I say," she told him. Then she pointed Gideon to a patch of grass near the middle of the frame. He went and stood where she put him, with his hat in his hands, and did not ask her one question about it, because by then, he knew that Wren Mercer directed her own photographs. Wren walked around from behind the camera for the first time anyone in Cathedral Gulch could remember, and stood in the grass beside him. "Hold still," he said, quietly, mostly to himself. "That's your line. Say it anyway. Hold still, Wren." She did. She stood absolutely still in the long grass with the town below and her hands empty at her sides. She did not look at the lens. She looked at Gideon. "Now," she said. Toby pressed the bulb. Honoria Marsh took her train on the 19th with 2 photographs in her carpet bag, one of a stone and one that Wren had printed for her without being asked. And she wrote from Ohio twice that winter and came back the following spring, and the spring after, and never did entirely leave. Gideon and Wren were married in November, in the church with the real bell. His wedding gift to her was a sign for the studio front, cut in stone and set above the door where the painted board had been. Wren Mercer, photographer. Her name, exactly as it had always been. The photograph from the bottom of the hill hung in the studio where every family who came to sit could see it, and it was the one people always asked about, because there was something odd in it. The woman in it isn't looking at the camera. She is looking at the man beside her, and he is looking straight down the lens like a man told to hold still and doing his level best, and you can tell, even at that distance, that his ears have gone red. She could photograph the living children after that. It came back slow, the way most of it comes back. The first living child she photographed without handing the bulb to Toby was Axel Berg, the following spring. He wore his father's cap. It was still too large for him. It had stopped swallowing his ears. She printed 2. One went to his grandmother in the old country. The other she set on the shelf above the wash sink, beside a photograph of a stonecutter's hands, and the pair of them stood there in the light for years. You know what stays with me about this one? Gideon spent a year in front of a blank stone because he thought the blank was keeping his brother. It wasn't. It was only keeping him, up on that hill, out of his own life. And Wren spent 3 years behind a camera for the same reason, and never knew it. She thought she was the one who kept things. She had kept everyone in that town, and every ordinary day of her daughter's life. And she had quietly kept herself out of all of it. And it took an old woman in a graveyard asking 3 words to show her what it had cost. Who takes yours? That's the whole of it, I think. There's someone in your life you've been keeping, some name you've meant to say, some letter you've meant to be the first to write. Don't stand behind it. Get where you can be seen. Thank you, truly, for spending this evening with me. Until the next trail, friend, leave the porch light on.